When she found herself on the verge of life and death and freezing with fear, realized who exactly had come for her soul, the woman was horrified by such a terrible turn of events. She definitely wasn't expecting this. After all, just recently everything was fine, and suddenly in one moment, everything changed. What followed was worse than the worst nightmare she had ever seen. But the scariest thing was that everything that was happening was not a dream, but a reality. The very reality that she had been denying all her life. But now, all she had to do was admit to herself that the afterlife really exists, and the most incredible things can happen to a person's soul in it. It all started on May 5, 1995, when dentist Gloria Polo, along with her husband and nephew, went to the library to get some necessary books to work on her dissertation. On the way home, a heavy downpour suddenly began. Gloria opened an umbrella, and she and her nephew walked under it, while her husband walked along the walls of buildings, sheltering under their eaves from the increasing rain. When the woman and her companion were about to jump over a large puddle that had spread out between the trees, they were struck by lightning. The nephew immediately died on the spot, and she, having received many severe burns, lost consciousness. Fortunately, her husband reacted quickly and called the doctors, who took her to the intensive care unit. Gloria Polo describes those events as follows. While my body was in the operating room, my soul was flying through a wonderful tunnel in the direction of what we call the afterlife. That's where I ended up. I was surrounded by a white light that filled my soul with such bliss that it is impossible to convey it in words. I felt completely free from time and space. But then Gloria did not know that very soon she would have to go through difficult trials, from which Holone's blood was in her veins. Meanwhile, all the relatives who had long since left the physical world appeared before her eyes. According to Gloria, the perception of people in the otherworldly space has changed dramatically. She described these changes as follows. During my earthly life, I only paid attention to whether a person was fat or thin, how ugly he was. But, thinking about her children, she found herself next to them and tried to hug them, although she realized that she was in a disembodied state. And yet her 9-year-old daughter clearly felt something. She smiled and said the word "Mom" softly. But Gloria didn't have time to answer, when suddenly some invisible force brought her back to those beautiful places where she had been before. There, the woman saw her nephew again, who was killed by lightning. He stood, frozen in indecision, near the beautiful gate leading to the wonderful garden. Gloria immediately realized that this was the entrance to paradise. There could be no other place so beautiful. Golden radiance emanated from there, and divine love and kindness wafted out. I wanted to bask in these rays of happiness forever. The nephew looked back, smiled at her, and waved goodbye before entering paradise. Gloria felt that no matter how much she wanted to follow him, it was too early for her to go there. And then, as if from afar, she heard her husband's voice. He begged his wife not to give up because her children needed her. At the same moment, the vision of the beautiful Garden of Eden disappeared, and Gloria Polo found herself next to her body, which was surrounded on all sides by doctors trying to bring her back to life. For a while, Gloria anxiously watched what was happening in the operating room, but soon noticed that several people were standing with her. At first, it seemed to her that it was an additional medical team, but when Gloria looked at them closely, she was stunned with fear. She had never felt such horror in her life. Gloria described these events as follows. The faces of these creatures were terrible. Their eyes were blazing with hatred. Looking at them, I knew that these creepy monsters had come for me. They surrounded me, and I was very scared. I tried to crawl into my body like I was hiding in a hole, but my own flesh wouldn't let me back in. Then I was completely paralyzed by fear. At that moment, Gloria decided that her only salvation would be to try to escape. Running out into the hospital corridor, she found herself in a completely different place than she had expected. It was not a corridor, but a tunnel that led not to the light, as they say, but on the contrary. Her soul was carried towards some dark and frightening area. The longer she flew along it, the darker it became around her. Finally, she felt a solid surface beneath her. At least, that's how she felt it. But before the woman could take a deep breath, she realized that she was actually standing on the very edge of an abyss, from which emanated an inhuman emptiness and despair. Looking into this abyss, Gloria realized that if she fell down now, her soul would disappear into the oblivion of hell forever and ever. And at that moment, she realized why she was there. The reason was her vanity and excessive, though well-concealed, selfishness. During her lifetime, she didn't really love anyone, but was a hypocritical person. Later, Gloria confessed, "When I saw someone else's grief, I said that I sympathized with people, but in fact, I never had a drop of real compassion. On the contrary, I thought they all deserved their troubles as punishment." But when she realized all this on the edge of that damned abyss, she felt incredible shame. Alas, nothing could help anymore. No matter how much the woman resisted what was happening, an invisible force still began to slowly lower her into the black abyss of darkness. Gloria felt the endless suffering and pain that reigned around her, and at some point she realized that the devil really existed. She even thought she heard his quiet, sarcastic laugh. People like her, vain, envious, hypocritical, and proud, were his favorite treat. In her memoirs about those events, Gloria said the following: "I saw a large number of people there, completely overcome by torment. They gritted their teeth, let out heart-rending growls and painful screams, and all this made me shudder. To be honest, I still can't get over that shock. I will never forget those terrible events. It's been years since I've been through this, but every time I think about it, I cry out of compassion for those unfortunate people." Then Gloria saw a glimmer of light in her soul. Dim, barely noticeable, but still light. Unfortunately, the monsters that surrounded her also noticed this, and they immediately rushed at her, trying to take away this light. She realized that just a little more, and these creatures would tear her soul apart. In incredible despair, the woman screamed, and this cry became her parting words and prayer of repentance. And then a real miracle happened. Light broke through the darkness, and she heard someone's voice, which said that this time she would be saved thanks to those who love her. She will be given a second chance. Gloria Polo described her return from the abode of suffering and torment as follows: "When that very voice of light was heard, as I called it to myself, all these dark creatures instantly recoiled in horror, as if they too worshipped the Lord. And then, when I swore that I would take my second chance at life, I saw many small lights appear in the dark. They were the hearts of people who sincerely wished for my return. Guided by their light, I slowly began to get out of this terrible place, which with full confidence can be called hell." Having been beyond our mortal existence and personally seen what really happens in the afterlife, Gloria Polo said, "The biggest deception and the most clever trick of the devil is that he spreads lies as if he doesn't exist at all. But he is there, and sooner or later he will reveal his account to us. The only way to avoid this situation is to live a full life through the realization of our inner spiritual light and not selfish whims." No less dramatic experiences were shared by another person who also visited the border of our mortal existence. His name was John, and this is what he himself said about his experience of being in the other world, where he had to go after his heart suddenly stopped during surgery. "What I saw in the first moments after my death shocked me so much that even the very fact that I died, he faded into the background. The vision that appeared in front of my eyes caused such horror in me that it seemed as if the soul itself trembled with fear, although I never believed in its existence, considering its presence to be just a stupid superstition. But now only she and the experience she was destined to go through mattered. In the first minutes of my stay in the afterlife, I desperately hoped that this was just a terrible dream, and I would soon wake up in the world I was used to. But alas, these were vain hopes. Those shuddering visions that now appeared before my eyes are the real otherworldly space, and it all eloquently proved that most of what we were told about life after death is a complete lie. The truth is so frightening that apparently few people dared to voice it." For John, it all started when, at the moment of cardiac arrest, his consciousness seemed to be blown away from his body by a strong storm wind. He later recalled that this was not followed by any soaring over his own flesh, nor flying through a tunnel with light at the end. There was nothing good at all, it was just pitch black. After that, he found himself on a lifeless flat plain that was filled to the horizon with angry, translucent creatures that only vaguely resembled humans. They were ugly, made of mist mixed with ash. And yet, no matter how hopeless the situation John found himself in, he noticed something that went unnoticed by the creatures squabbling with each other on the plain. He saw that someone was watching them, ready to come to their aid at any moment if they showed even a little prudence and a desire to escape from the terrible hell. They were higher beings who, out of compassion for the unfortunate, descend into the darkness in order to bring to light those who will be ready to go through purgatory. John told this story to his cardiologist, Pim van Lommel, who, together with his team of doctors, brought him back to life. Pim van Lommel spent a lot of time studying the question of the existence of life beyond our mortal existence. He conducted numerous surveys of people who had experienced clinical death and came to the conclusion that after the end of life, people see not only light, but also darkness. Many of them spoke of a frighteningly dark space from which they could not escape. The memories of such people were completely devoid of positive emotions. Patients who had been in the dark felt fear, so intense that they kept silent about their experiences for a long time. And this is not surprising, because such places were visited by those whose souls were burdened with evil. Therefore, when they returned to their earthly existence, they knew perfectly well what awaited them later, when death would take its toll. That's why they were afraid to admit it. Although some still found the courage and shared their otherworldly experiences. So one of the patients said that after his death, he saw a dark tunnel and then fell into it and flew upside down with great speed. As this soulless and cold dust continued, he could hear a terrifying laughter, like whiskey. Then creatures began to appear, trying to grab him. The patient confessed that it was only at that moment, when it seemed that there was nothing left in him but fear, that he finally remembered God and began to pray to him furiously. After that, the fall stopped, and through the terrible hum, the voices of the doctors who were fighting for his life could be heard. After carefully studying the stories of his patients who had visited the otherworldly space, Pim van Lommel came to the conclusion that after the end of earthly life, souls are sorted into high and low vibrations. High vibrations indicate that a person performed many good deeds during his lifetime, was selfless and spiritually developed. Low vibrations, on the contrary, indicate that a person was busy only satisfying his selfish desires. The former, after death, go to the higher realms of the afterlife, and the latter, to where they will atone for their sins in terrible suffering forever. Just as there is no beginning and no end to the universe, so there will be no end for our consciousness in physical death. It continues to gain experience in a dimension invisible to us, where the past, present, and future are endless. That is why death and birth should be considered as a transition from one state of consciousness to another. But it's one thing to study the experience of other people's clinical death, and another thing is to visit the afterlife yourself. This is exactly what happened to an anesthesiologist named Rajiv, who was a skeptic and generally did not believe in the existence of the soul or in the otherworldly space. Everything changed dramatically in 2010, when Rajiv, who himself found himself in intensive care due to a serious illness, suffered a clinical death on the operating table. The doctors had to state this fact, but they did not know that at that moment, their patient was faced with the unimaginable. The first thing that struck the man was that his soul really separated from his body and soared to the ceiling. His consciousness rose higher and higher, and the surrounding reality became brighter and brighter. Then something happened that it is impossible to remember without a shudder. Suddenly, all the visions disappeared, and complete darkness fell. For a brief moment, Rajiv even thought that he was finally returning back to his body, but that was not the case. He was horrified to discover that something terrifying was approaching him from the depths of the darkness at a rapid speed. He couldn't figure out what it was, but he could feel it terrifying him. In addition, this frightening phenomenon was accompanied by thunderclaps, which made his soul shake in panic. Then Rajiv seemed to be caught by an invisible cold wind, and in the same second he found himself on the very edge of a fiery abyss. Terrified, he tried to move away, but some force was steadily pushing him to the edge, with the intention of throwing him into the hyena of fire. He had never felt such fear before. Where are the angels who were supposed to meet him? Where are the rainbow places that the other dead talked about? Once in this place, he realized that it was all a lie. After death, there is only darkness, and this is the abyss that is ready to incinerate his soul. It would seem that what could be worse? But as if in a terrible dream, someone's mocking metallic voice said, "You've never loved anyone." Rajiv looked around but saw no one. He understood perfectly well that these words were addressed to him personally, and unfortunately, it was true. Like Gloria Polo, he didn't really love anyone during his lifetime, and he treated his patients with extreme cynicism, perceiving them only as a source of income. Rajiv had to honestly admit to himself that he deserved to be thrown into the infernal fiery abyss. And yet, somewhere in the depths of his soul, he had a glimmer of hope for redemption, and he prayed, "God, give me one more chance." No sooner had he uttered these words than he noticed a human figure out of the corner of his eye. When he looked closer, he was filled with even more fear. It was his father, who died 20 years ago. He was incredibly cruel and strict, and it didn't cost him anything to roughly punish his son for any wrongdoing. As a child, Rajiv considered him a real monster. But now it was clear that his father had undergone a spiritual transformation that had completely changed him. Her father took her by the hand and helped her move away from the edge of the fiery abyss. Rajiv told about further events as follows. Then we flew through some kind of tunnel and found ourselves in an amazing place. My dad left me there, and I was left alone. But not for long. Almost immediately, I met a creature that looked like an angel. It told me that I had to return to physical life, and that I needed to leave my job as an anesthesiologist and become a soul healer. In other words, I should dedicate my life to helping people suffering from mental illness. This will be my atonement for all the sins that I have committed. The higher powers are giving me a second chance, and I vowed to take it. After leaving the hospital, Rajiv Parthi did just that. He stopped his professional medical career and began to devote all his time to helping people. Dear friends, thank you for watching my video to the end. If you liked it, please like it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It's very important. Thank you, and have a nice day.